Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Be Freaking Awesome. I am one of your hosts, Sami Kinnison, here with Angela Belford. This is the first episode in May, and we want to take a moment to talk about Mental Health Awareness Month. However, we are probably going to talk about it in not the traditional, super mainstreamy way.
Shocking.
Angela and I have feelings and thoughts and opinions, and yeah, that's shocking. 100 plus podcast episodes in, we have opinions. However, we have potentially some controversial opinions today. A hot take, if you will, as Angela learned the term last week with Kat and Lexi, what a hot take is. Today, we kind of want to share some of our hot takes about mental health and how it impacts different generations. And really and truthfully, yes?
Well, what about people that didn't tune in last week? Go ahead and maybe don't know what a hot take is.
Oh, yes. A hot take, if you didn't tune in last week, a hot take is a controversial opinion about something. It is your stance that might be unpopular, but this is how you feel about it. So we have some hot takes, but also sort of a message to kind of different generations when it comes to talking about mental health. I do want us to start this conversation with a little bit of a disclaimer. If you are a longtime listener, you know that Angela and I are really, really supportive of new ideas, really trying to help educate people to expand your knowledge base and to see something a little bit different than how you might have seen it before. Today's content, we might seem maybe harsh or maybe a little bit pushy. And I want that to come with the balance that we absolutely know that mental health issues are super important and it really matters to address these things. And in order to live a freaking awesome life, if you're living with things that are just stuffed in the closet that you never want to address, that is not going to help anybody. And so if anything we say today may come across as offensive or hurtful, that's not our intent. Our intent is to help stretch your boundaries and to think about something in a different way. And as always, if you have big thoughts or big feelings about this, we would really love to hear it. Send us an email at podcast@befreakingawesome.com. That is B, just a single letter B, freakingawesome.com. And tell us what you think. Angela, any other thoughts or additions to kind of our opening disclaimer?
Well, we're going to talk about the generations today, and it could be that you're like, well, gosh, I'm a part of that generation, but I actually feel more like this other generation. Totally fine. Then just kind of pay attention to the ups and downs of, where your starting point, because maybe you're starting in a different place.
We're also talking stereotypically, not
true.
Every single unique individual.
100%. 100%.
I love it. All right, well, let's just jump right into our controversial topics. Angela, we're going to start with hold on one second. I just wanted to make sure the door was opening. We were getting something delivered. Oh my gosh, I bet it's our other banner. Sorry. So, Angela, let's start and jump in. What things would you love to tell boomers about mental health?
Well, just so we make sure that we understand, boomer is not the idea of like, okay, boomer. We're not using it in that method. We're actually using it in the method of like after World War II, between 1946 and 1964, all the men that were still alive came back from war and they were excited to celebrate being back from war. And there was a large, long time increase in the number of births that were happening. And so they were part of coming out of the, Great Depression. And we have this huge economic boom. And so there was some cool things happening in the world, and there were some ways that that worked for them on how to function in the world. And so because those things, how they functioned, they believed that they were the best way to do life. And maybe some of them weren't so great. So when it comes to the topic of mental health, I think often what I hear from people that are in that boomer generation is, we just don't talk about it. We're fine. We do not need to talk about everything. We don't need to air our dirty laundry. We're never going to ever going to tell these people. Now, as I said, you may be part of any of the other generations and you may have gotten this message or embraced this message. And if so, then that's fine. But there is often this idea of why would you possibly talk about that? Whatever
It's in
that
the past.
is.
You don't need to
It's
address
in the
it.
past. Doesn't affect me. That was when I was a child. Like that doesn't affect me. I'm living my life. And so we're not ever going to address the things that happened to us in the past because we're just going to keep moving forward. And sometimes I want to say to people, I'm like, I would love to buy into what you're saying. However, your leg is gushing blood all over my carpet. And so, and
Maybe not literally.
by gushing blood, I mean it as a metaphor for like the healing that you haven't done, the wounds that you have, you are being unpleasant around other people. So, some indicators to me that this might not, your way of life might not be working. Do you have a fabulous relationship with all of your family members that is not based on fear and is not based on them never telling you anything
Obligation.
that is going on in their life? Do you have, do you experience a good amount of health? And I know like health is a tricky subject because people are like, oh, am I causing my own health issues? Well, I hate to tell you, but if you don't address your emotions, then it's going to come out in the way of like heart attacks and aches and pains and chronic inflammation, which we're actually going to talk a lot more about in an upcoming podcast. And so, like, if you got some fruit on your tree that is working for you, then great, keep doing what you're doing. But if perhaps maybe you're like, why can't I just get along with these young people? Keep tuning in and perhaps maybe you'll learn some things.
I would argue that the boomers that I interact with are not asking, why can't I get along with these young people? They're saying, what's
True
wrong with these
story.
young people that they won't get along with me? That
Oh,
is a way
yes.
you can approach the world, is say, what is everybody else's problem? It's obviously not me. And again, like we just said, if that's working for you, then great, skip on past. But I would guess if you're asking that question, it's probably not working for you. And taking a moment to try to understand somebody else's point of view, try to understand the world in which somebody else grew up, understand what it's like to be a child growing up in the age of the internet where nobody knows what is going on and all of these things, and access to information is 24/7. That as a child is very different than how boomers grew up as children, and that's going to impact you differently. And maybe people are not the snowflake that you think they are, but they have grown up in a world that you couldn't dream of, that you read about in science fiction novels. That is the world that millennials and Gen Zers grew up in. We don't have the tools. We don't know how to address the science fiction world we live in right now. Maybe a touch of empathy and a touch of, man, that just sounds so hard, will go a long way. And I that's my thing to boomers is I I don't want to discredit and say that your childhood and your adult life was easy. That's not what I'm saying at all. I get that you guys went through hard things as well. Civil rights, Cold War, all of those things sound really big, and in some ways the change can be terrifying to have dealt with, but that does not mean that you get a monopoly on hard things to have dealt with while you were growing up. Just because comparative, maybe you feel like somebody else had it easier, that doesn't mean that theirs was easy, even if you thought it might have been easier. So that's what I want to tell boomers about mental health is take a moment to view the world from somebody else's perspective. Try see where they're coming from. All right. Next generation. Angela, we're coming for you, for your generation, Gen X.
We are
What do
perfect
you
in
got to
every
say?
way. We are perfect in every way. I mean, all you have to do is look at our glamour shots and you can see like beautiful hair, beautiful makeup. We make sure we always look good. Like always look good. Like I cannot tell you how much my younger generation people in my life still throw it at my face that I told them sometimes no pain, no gain.
I'm pretty sure the phrase that
All
I
of that
heard
was
was no pain, no beauty was my when I was getting my braces put on.
oh
So
yeah, that was probably true. I was like, there was probably a connection to beauty. Okay, Gen X, man, we are like the sandwich, forgotten generation. You got this giant group of people, the boomers, and then you got the giant generation after us, the millennials. We're sort of this like in between. What happened? Just in case you want to know, Gen X is kind of in the range of you were born between 1965 and 1980. Which means you got
So you're
to be a
probably 44 to 59 age range right now.
right, right. I'm smack in the middle of that, 1973. That means that I got to be a teenager in the late 80s. It was glorious. And that we didn't have to date on social media, which was phenomenal. We had to do it the old-fashioned way. Anyway, sorry. I'm going to get into the glory days of being a Gen Xer. And also recently Instagram has figured out that this entertains me, and so they give me lots and lots of things about like we survived crimping our hair. We can survive everything. And so I would say Gen X is a also wait. The other thing about Gen X is that it wasn't until the early 90s that I'm sorry, the early 80s that we even knew that your brain could change. And so as we were growing up, and that wasn't widespread knowledge. And so we had no idea that you could actually like do stuff to like create neuro pathways in your brain. Like that was brand new in like the early 80s. And so there's so many things. We have just lived through so much change and innovation, and constantly our lives have gotten better and better and better. Oh my goodness, some of the the Instagram reels are playing in my head of like we used to have to dial the phone like with a rotary dial, and if your friend had nines, and then you could like anyway, we've endured a lot. And I would say that our perspective in general is that our life just kept getting better because so much technology advanced, and so we kind of are a little bit like, what are you complaining about? It's fine. Like it's fine. Like just keep going. Like okay, I get there's some new things that we could learn. I don't think we're huge denial people. I just don't know that we think that that stuff is affecting us. Maybe it does, but I think we embrace toxic positivity because we grew
Mm.
up with like Zig Ziglar, Tony Robbins was young with us. And so I think there's an element of like just look at how great it is. We survived all of televangelists anyway. So I think I have gone on a complete and total tangent on how awesome Gen
Just
X
the
is because
glory days.
we never, oh, the glory days. That just reminds me of Bruce Springsteen. Anyway, so we don't ever get a lot of we don't get a lot of playtime right now. And I would say that we are trying to figure it out. We're not in denial. We don't have the answers, but we try to navigate through. That's my perspective,
So
but you may have a different idea.
what's interesting is that for me, to toot your horn, Angela, I think you're different than a lot of people. Um, and I think that your willingness to accept growth and to acknowledge that I'm not where I want to be and I want to take steps forward in healing. I think that there are some people within your generation that are like that, but I also know a fair amount of other people who are not
Yeah.
that way. And
Yeah.
so when I think about what do I want to tell Gen Xers, I have to think this is not what do I want to tell my mom,
No.
because my mom's in a little bit different place. I
Right.
think
That's why
that
I said we're not in denial, but we don't pretend to have it all figured out. We're sort of just trying to navigate. I don't think, yeah. I
when
don't
I
think
think
that in general we embrace, I'm not saying we embrace growth like I do as a generation. Go
well,
ahead.
and so the things that I would have to say to Gen X is that thank you for acknowledging that mental health is important. What are you going to do about your own self? Because it's not too late. It's not too late to address these things. And like I think about friends that I have right now, and particularly I think about mother in laws that are sort of in this age range, this Gen X age range, that are just like, this is just what it is to be a mother in law. And yeah, I'm just going to be critical and kind of just is what it is. And I hope you accept that because this is me. Um, I'm all about you going on a mental health journey, but that's not for me. Therapy is an absolute no. Sure, I'll watch some things on Instagram and learn a little bit about this, but there's also almost a shame that I think comes from your parents, your baby boomers, that if you have to go to therapy, whoo, golly gee, something's really messed up with you. And so it takes a lot. And they're like, wow, it's so courageous to go to therapy. And I'm like, but is it courageous to go to therapy? Does it have to be courageous to go to therapy? Can't it just be a good thing to do, not this huge brave act to go and seek healing? It's like that's what I would love to encourage Gen Xers is stop making it this big thing to go heal and just go heal. Like you don't have to be brave to do it. But I guess if you do need to be brave, then go be brave. But just go do it already, okay? That's where I'm at with Gen Xers.
Okay, so the next generation is millennials. And these lovelies,
Ooh.
they were born 1981 to 1996.
All right, now we're talking about me.
We're talking about you. You are the
Let me tell
younger
you
millennial.
about the glory days of being a
Oh, tell
millennial,
me the
okay?
glory days of being a millennial.
The glory days of being a millennial. We grew up when we were small children. The world was set to end in 2000. And so everybody instilled us with this sense of panic that the world was going to end at any moment. But you know what? 2000 came and went, Y2K, nobody died. But you know what's next? 2012. We're all going to die again in 2012. That'll be the end of the world. And then we
You forgot
have
9/11, what actually happened.
Oh, yes. Then 9/11. I forgot 2001, where we're still not adults yet. Most millennials, I was like, even if you were born in 81, 2001, you'd be 20, which is technically an adult, but like a baby adult, like just barely trying to figure out your way in the world. So you're either a child or a baby adult when 9/11 happened. Then I also remember the 90s, like everybody on the street corner was set to kidnap you. Um and so that was a big part of our childhood is don't get into vans with people with candy. When you go on the internet, people are definitely going to stalk you and kidnap you and hurt you and all of these bad things. So like the internet is a dangerous place. The world is a dangerous place. The housing market crashes in 2008. These are the glory days of being a millennial, all right? Just one like world crash after another. I say all of
I'm
this not
laughing.
to really I'm being dramatic, but I think that it is important to remember that these are some of the big events that happened in our like formative days. That when somebody's like, wow, millennials are just like a whole anxious generation. I'm like, and that makes sense. Okay. That makes
It
sense
does.
because from the day that we were born, you all have been figuring out, wow, maybe we shouldn't just let our children wander everywhere that they possibly can because bad things could happen to them. Maybe we shouldn't do
Oh,
all
we
these
were told go
things.
play and get home before dark.
Don't come home until dark is what I have
Don't
heard
come
some
home
people
until
say.
yeah, don't come home until dark. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
That was real life.
there are some good things about our generation. I think that we really were the first generation to have internet with us from the beginning. Yes, it was just beginning, as in most millennials still can remember the dial up sound, and that sound will still trigger some things in our brain of like, oh, internet starting whenever you hear this noise. We were there in the baby days. But golly, there was also some really neat things that happened in the early days of the internet, back before corporations really like made it all this big advertising and marketing mechanism. There were weird YouTube videos, there was song sharing. The early days of social media was just about connecting with people. Angela's cueing me that I need to talk about mental health.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about the glory days of your 80s babies, okay? Give me a moment. Millennials have had it rough, okay? I'm here to stand for millennials having it rough. We've had all of our older generations call us snowflakes for such a long time. And I think that millennials kind of are snowflakes sometimes. I will admit. I Angela, is that not what you thought I was going with that?
I did not. And you mean the way of you guys are all unique and special, or like you
We
melt
are
real
unique and
easy?
special. I think we are unique and special, but I also think that we have more access to information than ever. And so the ease of which to jump into anxiety is so fast. You like growing up, You didn't know that this particular thing was going to lead to bad things. Nobody was telling you, if you raise your kid this way, these are all the horrible things that are going to happen to them. Whereas now I can't make a single parenting decision without somebody telling me the 8 ways that I'm ruining my child forever by making this single parenting decision. And so it makes sense to me that this is a very anxious generation, that the access to information is more than our brains know how to handle. And I don't know that we have the tools. We are having to forage to get our own tools to figure out how to address this. We are sort of thrust into this space and then told, okay, now address your mental health problems. And it has been a steep learning curve along the way. I think that we are doing fairly well as a generation in saying therapy is not a shameful experience. It's not a brave experience. It's probably a normal part of life for everybody. We are more likely to ask for help. We are more likely to get medication, to get diagnosis, to tell people something is not okay. Whereas the previous generations just hid it. We don't talk about it. And we will talk about it, sometimes to a fault, but also to the point of seeking solutions. Now, I really feel like we have had to, really bushwhack our way through the forest to build a trail. And we'll talk about bushwhacking this trail for the next generation here in a moment. But Angela, what other thoughts do you have for millennials or any response to things I've said?
Well, so I would say that what's funny to me is that if you look at each generation as they turn 18 to 20, like a big cohort of people, like the previous generations are going to be kind of yelling at them, because if you think about, like, somebody wants to tell me that the boomers, oh, I can't believe these kids these days. And I'm like, it is literally what your parents said to you in the 60s. Do we need to talk about peace, drugs, and rock and roll? Like, 60s and early 70s is when the boomers turned 18. And then they had to grow up and they had to provide for their families that they wanted to have, and they had to do all those things. And so maybe they had to grow up a little earlier because that's what you did back in those days. And then, as I don't remember them complaining too terribly much about us when we turned 18. We were just small and quiet, and we were just happy and big hair. I don't know. But then as the millennials turned 18, they're like, oh my gosh, kids these days. Kids these days. And I'm like, wait a minute. Number one, boomers, you had most of these millennials, so
Yes.
it's your own, it's your own problem. So quit your complaining.
Who
That's not
gave
what I
us
normally say about that.
participation? Who gave us participation trophies? Everybody who is mad that millennials get participation trophies. We did not buy those for ourselves. Somebody bought them for us,
Thank
okay?
you.
Thank you, boomers.
Thank you. So anyway, so I just say, like, as they turn 18, we're like, oh, these kids. Maybe it's that humans between 18 and 24, we have this very high expectation that they are adults, but yet they don't have a prefrontal cortex. And so, of course, they're not making great decisions. Their executive function is not fully developed. And yet we're allowing them to take on $200,000 worth of student loan debt. How does that make any sense? Our system is jacked up. I just don't understand. I would love to hear some empathy for these generations, because I did have somebody that said, gosh, we were at one of those little Italian restaurants, where you you have to turn sideways and wiggle your butt at the people behind you to get into your spot, and so then you can't help it, but you're listening to everybody's conversation. Well, somebody's phone goes off, news alert, actually a couple of them. Oh, NATO rejected, blah, 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 blah. This is a couple of years ago. And I was like, they go, something was said. And they were like, why do the kids these days, why are they so afraid? And I go, when we were their age, we barely knew what NATO was. It didn't come across as a news alert that NATO was doing something, And so I'm not saying we didn't have Desert Storm and Desert Shield and all of those things. We did, but they were on the news at night, in the paper.
Twice a day,
You
tops.
did 2-3 times a day, maybe. Maybe your parents got up and listened to the morning shows. Maybe you had the newspaper. Maybe you had the evening show. At worst, if you stayed up till 10 o'clock. But we're talking 24/7. And so I just would love everybody to have empathy. That's kind of across the board. And for you millennials, understand that the generations before you thought that once you got a brain injury, your brain never fixed. They didn't know that you didn't have a prefrontal cortex. We didn't know anything about the brain. We didn't know anything about this mental health stuff. In the 50s, in the 1950s, in it has been researched and studied that in England, and I'm not saying it wasn't here, but I just know the research in England, they thought it was a good idea to drop kids at the hospital when they were sick and come visit them once a week. Like that was standard medical practice. That wasn't that long ago. So you can imagine that if you have to navigate a world where people don't think you need your parents, that there's so many abandonment issues with that. There's so many things, and your ability to form deep, close relationships was shaped by the society you were raised in. And so just like you guys are asking us to have some empathy, and you're asking, like, have some empathy that they were also doing the best they could and that they didn't know better. And hopefully the power of the internet will allow them to know better and do better.
This sort of makes me think about this is Mental Health Awareness Month. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, what was mental health treatment? Mental health treatment was lobotomies, was getting
Yeah.
checked into a facility and maybe never leaving. And it was, if you seem too crazy or too much, or there's too much mental health issue, your options are to be removed from society in some way, medically or in a facility, and all of these things. I can't imagine what that would be like to have to say, no, 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 guys, I am fine and you don't need to take me somewhere. Of course, everything is fine, because if the options are either I'm fine and I pretend everything's okay, or I get checked into a hospital where people are not treated well, or all of these things, heck yeah, I'm going to be fine. Heck yeah, if those
Yeah.
are my choices, I
Yeah.
will deal with fine. Whereas
Right.
now, those choices, those aren't the choices. There are so many more options. And even if you are at the point that you need to get checked in to receive care in a residential facility, it is nowhere near the same type of experience as it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I'm not saying everything is perfect. I'm not saying everything is working out all the time. I am just saying that it is a very different experience than before. So, as far as empathy, let's give some grace that these mental health options were not there for people growing up. This is part of
Do you
why I
know that
really
it was,
appreciate. Go ahead.
oh, well, it was really late in the 70s when they first had Prozac. That was just created. Actually, if you read The Body Keeps Score, he talks about being in 1972. The idea of trauma was still new, and now we talk about it in everything. Well, maybe I'm
Yeah.
just in these circles that they do, but he can remember in the late 70s when they first began to consider chemicals to help with mental health issues. So much has happened in such a short period of time.
So, even with all of this that has happened in such a short period of time, one of the things I'd like to transition to the next generation, and let's talk about Gen Z. So to pick back up where I was, millennials have bushwhacked our way through the trail. We have paved and blazed a trail. Behind us comes our Gen Z follow-up generation, and I'll be honest, these are where some of my controversial takes are a little more controversial. Um that I think that we have pendulum swung a little bit, and that there are some times Gen Zers, with all the love, can take things to the extreme and can say, here is my trauma of I didn't turn in my homework on time. I need to take a mental health day because I'm too anxious about what my teacher will say to me. Or the, there's just things that like I'm afraid of. And because I have this tool of mental health and mental health awareness and sometimes excuses, I'm just not going to face it and address it and deal with it. So we'll just do whatever we want to instead. And I think that Gen Z, I hear you. And also, we might need to grow a little bit of a thicker skin. That the world is hard and not everything is going to go your way. And sometimes you still have to operate and do things anyway. Figure it out.
So I would say most Gen Z were probably raised by some Gen Xers who We're still trying to, make their parents happy with how they raise their kids, a little bit, and really, quite frankly, just caught in the mix in the middle. What's interesting is that Gen Z is some numbers say born from 1997 to 2012. So that means currently they are 12 to 27. I think it's very hard to try and kind of label a generation that has still got 12-year-olds in it. Like, we are like the difference between where my son, was born in 1997, and so he'll be 27 this year. He has different takes on things than even his sister, who's 24, and the 18-year-olds. It's funny because Lexi has had a couple of 18-year-olds now kind of okay boomer her, and it's freaking hilarious. She's just 6 years older than them. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
I realized, we had a structure. We were going to transition to the generation. We were going to give you the data, tell you who it is, and then give our hot takes. And we were like Gen Z, and I just came in real hot
Oh,
with
that's okay.
here's my things. And then I'm immediately reminded of what you just said a moment ago of 18 to 24-year-olds are kind of not the best people at times. They're just still growing humans. They're baby
They
adults. And maybe some of my takes and judgment is because I'm a little bit annoyed at these baby humans, and I'm ready for them to express some gratitude for the work that us millennials have done and not just keep giving us crap. Okay, we worked hard for you, Gen Z. We worked hard. Stop teasing us all the time.
Well, and I mean, the oldest millennials are also parents of these Gen Z kids. You think about, if you're
Yeah.
43, it's very reasonable that you've easily got a 12-year-old in there. You could easily have. So that's also just an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is I think that my take on Gen Z, I waffle a little bit. It's fun to
Give me both
be a
sides of the
parent of
waffle.
millennials and a Gen Z. One that is firmly planted, 1999. She was born 6 weeks before the new the new century. Millennium, sorry.
Oh, I
Yes,
don't
that
know. It is
too.
century. I was just trying to help you find a word.
No, that's okay. The millennial makes sense, yeah. And so in some ways they're less resilient, and they're like, oh my gosh, my anxiety. Oh, I stubbed my toe. I think I should stay home all day. There's some parts of them that I go, hey, you know what? Fear is just your body's response to perception of danger. Not all fear is anxiety. You're going to feel fear when you have to do something scary and hard, and you've got to practice doing scary and hard things and overcome that fear. You don't need to always succumb to that and call it anxiety. Now, there's absolutely people that have a wide spectrum of anxiety disorders, and I am not talking about that. I'm talking about I have to stand up and say my name. I can't do it because it's too much anxiety. I'm like, it's just called fear. It's just called your fight, flight, or freeze response. It's okay. And so I think there's some elements of it there that they also need some language and some tools, and that those of us that have come before them can help to equip them. What's cool is that I think that they are eager to learn. Most of them. I don't get a lot of them that are like, oh, you don't know anything. They're interested, and they're a little more open, in my view, or in my
Your
experience,
experience.
to different viewpoints. Now, that I don't know what they say about me behind my back. I don't know. But I'll tell you, the other thing is that there is you get them activated in a good way. I am most interested in getting the Gen Z politically activated, because I think that they have a more balanced approach to some things. We don't have they don't believe we have to just actually put up with things in the government or whatever. They believe they can make a change. They've seen it. They're like, give me the name of the guy. I will stalk him on the internet. I will learn out. They don't need a background check. They know what they're doing. So there's some activation that I think could really benefit us. just need them to have just a tiny bit more resilience. And some of that could be, oh, well, when their brain gets fully formed, like, whoo, they're going to be a force, which we need a force. They're going to have to take up the slack for all these boomers leaving the workforce in droves. So we have this huge number of people that need medical care that are going to need, they're living longer, and we have much smaller generations coming behind needing to take care of them. And so we need some very activated Gen Z. Like, we're going to need y'all come out swinging, because I think y'all have got some great skills and we can learn a lot.
I
How's
love it.
that?
That's so
Not really a
kind.
hot take.
So generous. Um, so full of grace and empathy. What a model for all of us to look to. I wish I
I think
was in
I'm
a
more
place that I
entertained
could
by them.
respond.
I think they entertain me more than the other generations do. I'm just so entertained by them, because maybe because they don't have a lot of power right now. They don't have a lot of money, so they can't really cause us too much damage. So I'm just like, okay, let's talk about that.
I remember seeing like a meme that had two pictures. Atop both of them, it said "Nothing matters," and the first one was Gen Z, or sorry, it was millennial. Nothing matters, and they're hiding underneath the desk crying. And Gen Z, nothing matters, and they're frolicking through a field of flowers. And I felt like that was
Yeah.
really articulate that millennials, we do kind of freak out about a lot of things. We've had a lot of things sort of put on our generation, and we sort of get the teasing from both sides. Boomers and Gen Zers both tease us, but Gen Zers, yeah, you guys do have a lot more going for you and a lot more opportunity. And I don't know that they're at an age yet to be able to appreciate how different this world is for them, and how much more, especially when it comes to mental health, that it really is a privilege to be able to have access to these kinds of resources that practically no other generation had before them. Nobody else grew up with the kind of access to mental health resources that Gen Z does.
Gen Z also had a social media profile probably before they were born. Like, it is likely that their sonogram was posted on a Facebook.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And they're the first generation that has, like, a lot of their life has been documented in the way of, like, mom and dad being so proud. And so there's just I hope that they embrace the savviness of their generation and not the fear base of their generation, because there's some really, we have some hope. And I know everybody like, oh my God. And I'm like, no, I think we have some hope. They really do. They inspire me. And younger millennials too, like y'all 20 somethings who are like wanting less materialism, and you're wanting more joy in your life, and you're choosing less, and you're choosing more balance. Like, I like that, all that stuff. I don't know if that's mental health, but anyway.
So to sort of wrap this up in a little bow, do you have any broad thoughts or comments just on mental health awareness for everyone, for anyone?
Yeah, I think that how we love ourselves and how we judge ourselves is the depth and level that we love and judge others. And so if you notice yourself judging others, then check in the mirror, because you're probably judging yourself at that level as well. And so that could be a great indicator. And I would say, please reach for curiosity instead of judgment, because being curious about why somebody is the way they are is such a better way to build relationship. And assuming that because somebody else does it different, somebody younger does it different, that your way's better. That being said, somebody like is proposing to me this way of being, and they're like telling me how awesome it is and that I'm just wrong. And I am like, you don't have evidence to support your logic and your argument, because this part of is not working. And so you try to tell me it's not working because of this other thing. So anyway, I would just say, even if the fruit or the evidence doesn't exactly match, I think the most helpful question I ask people, well, is that working for you? If it's working for you, great. That's fine. Your way can be different than other people's ways. We don't all have to do it the same way.
I think
What about
that's
you?
great. I
Final
would
hot takes.
say, well, it's not really my hot take. But I think
Oh,
starting with where it's really my advice. This is not my hot take. It's just my advice for how to go about things. Starting with what you said, Angela, where noticing your judgment is probably something about yourself. I think the next action item after that, especially if you are worried or judgmental about a group of people, where how are these kids going to survive these days? Or even like, golly, these old people just don't get it. They don't understand. Spend some
mm,
time with real human beings. Spend some time actually getting to know people in a different generation, not spending time on social media looking at their Facebook posts. That's not how you get to know somebody. Not looking at statistics and news stories about the people in this generation, but real human connection, I think will make a difference. That seeing people where they are, seeing them and accepting them for exactly who they are and where they're at and noticing the good about them, I think will make a huge difference, especially if you're somebody who thinks that kids these days or old people these days, they just don't get it. Go talk to them. Go ask them.
I,
Understand where they
I,
are coming from.
I love that so much because we are so disconnected as society, and we think just because we're connected around the world that we are actually with people. And I am telling you, my favorite thing about my life is I have friends that are 14 and friends that are 97, and everything in between. Because when you can explore that kind of range of ideas, then it really does give you such a different perspective. Like, it's just not so simple. Nothing is simple. Nothing is black and white. There's just different situations and different scenarios. So I love that idea. That's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to us today, and happy Mental Health Awareness Month, however you choose to celebrate, whether that be a therapy session, a psychiatry session, or grounding, go lay in the grass and look at the sun and the trees, whatever you do to celebrate your mental health awareness. We're here for you, and we are so grateful that you're joining us on this intentional journey to live freaking awesome lives. Thanks so much and have a great day.